Good evening everyone and welcome to Plenty Talk Space. අපිත් එක ගොඩක් දෙනෙක් එකතු වෙලා ඉන්න නිසා අපි එහෙනම් දැන් පටන් ගමු. අද ප්‍රසන්ටේෂන් එකේ ටොපික් එක තමයි The Spirit of the Machine. අද ඉදිරිපත් කිරීම කරන්නේ රයන් ඩි සිල්වා. රයන් ඇත්තටම මුල ඉඳන්ම ප්ලේන්ටියත් එක්ක හිටපු කෙනෙක්. ඔහු මොරටුව විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයේ ආකිටෙක්චර් ෆැකල්ටි එකේ ශිෂ්‍යයෙක්. And Ryan told us that he has always been interested in things related to cars and automotive design, which is what he will be presenting today. So let's start. Ryan, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Amanthee. So good evening, everyone. So I'll start my presentation with these two images. So you can see the right-hand side, it's the Porsche 911 Carrera, the 2020 model. And it's a very luxurious and powerful sports car that you can find in the modern era. And in the left-hand side, you can see the Benz trial car by Carl Benz, and it's from 1885. So it is barely even a car from the today's standards, but it is the great ancestor for these modern cars. So you can see how the proportions, how the material usage and the shape, even the form has changed during these 125 years, roughly. So why I'm using terms like shape, proportion, material, these design terms into vehicles. That's what the purpose of my presentation, to convince you, to give you an idea that these vehicles are not just machines. There is something beyond that. So before getting into this in the depth of the evolution and design and everything, you need to know your basics. So there might be people who have been in cars, who have driven cars, who own cars, but all of you have to know these basics. So the very definition of the car, it says that it should be self-propelled. The meaning of self-propelled means there should be a method, a system to move your vehicle using its own power. So in our words, there should be an engine. So the engine is the heart of the car, and it's the most complex component in a car. So around it, we design everything. But in basic terms, there are some components that are that should be mandatory to a design. Some of them are the wheels, the body, the interior, the steering wheel, the dashboard, the headlights. You can name it for a long time. But this is what an average user has to deal with. You might be you maybe have to change the tire. You may have to change the oil. You maybe have to clean the interior. But this is what a designer has to deal with. So you can see this is the unseen part of a car. There are hundreds and thousands of different parts that has to come together to do this simple task, which is to carry you from point A to point B. So these little parts, different parts, are doing a big job underneath your the interior where you sit in the car. So this is a very small car. I guess it's a VW Polo, or it can be a Maruti Suzuki. But the point is, all of these parts has to come to fulfill this functional need. And this is a family car, but have you thought about something more complex? This is the 1966 Ferrari 330. This car is basically a car designed around an engine. This car is all about its engine. So I guess this is the car that went on to the 24 hours of Le Mans. There is a movie. So if you have seen it, this car should be familiar to you. But anyway, for those who don't know about it, this is a supercar. This car is designed and engineered to achieve greater speeds and keep it for longer durations. So from your language, for a person who is not into cars, you can see some components that are familiar to you. The wheels, the lights, and look at the door. It's barely even a door. The reason is the driver isn't has to get in and out very often, like in a family car. So you have seen how a car works. A car is a combination of different parts. But there is a question, is a car just a bunch of parts? So, this funny expression from an artist, he is trying to merge different parts from very luxury brands and very beautiful vehicles together and create a design. So you can see the Rolls-Royce Phantom doors, Range Rover Evoque wheels, Mini Cooper headlights, Aston Martin bumpers, Lamborghini Gallardo, roofline. These are very, very beautiful cars when you take individually. But you just get different components from them and you just merge it and you get this ugly vehicle. I don't think no one of you will buy this vehicle. So there is a design. So the person who do this very complex job is called a automotive designer or an architect. So this person is one of the famous Ferdinand A. Porsche, son of the Ferdinand Porsche, his son, the very famous designer who invented the Porsche company. So you can see he is doing something more than a typical engineer would do with a machine. He's sculpting it. You can see he's doing something with a model, and you can see sketches behind him, and you can see the iconic shape of the Porsche Carrera 911 model. So with this simple sketch, he will communicate with us using a very, very technical instrument. That's why I want to convince you, if you take a washing machine and a car, both of them are machines. But there is a fan base behind cars, and people love cars, and people, uh, there is a huge culture behind cars. This is the reason the car is not just a machine. So I would like to ask a question for the people who are not into these cars, and the car is just a instrument or a tool for these people. I would like to ask, how do you look at a car? Are you a person who is looking for a family car? Are you a person who loves vintage classic cars? And are you a person who is using cars as your profession? And are you a person who is trying to express your youth using these cars? And are you a person who is thinking about the economical aspect? And are you a person who is trying to convince your status, your power, your money? So you can see the different uses of these machines. So that's why I want to say that the cars are very much bonded with our society, with ourselves. And if you categorize how designers start to think about these vehicles, there are three different perspectives. The first one is the mechanical or the engineering perspective. You might be one of these people who thinks about how much horsepower you can get from your engine and how much acceleration you can get from these cars, like the Tesla Model S, which has the recorded most acceleration. And you might be a person who thinks about aerodynamics if you're racing. This is the Mercedes AMG GT, the green color vehicle. So it's one of the most aerodynamic cars in the world. So you might be a person who is thinking about top speed. And this is the Bugatti Chiron. It has the world record for the top speed. And you might be a person who thinks about the utilitarian perspective. So you might be thinking about how many people you can carry and how many types of good you can carry. Is it helping your business? And how much fuel economy you can get it? And like you might be a person who is thinking about how to mount a gun onto your truck bed and use these are the ISIS fighters using Toyota Land Cruisers for their missions. And are you a person with the artistic perspective? So some of these luxury brands exist because of this perspective. They are the perfect balance between art and technology. So don't get me wrong in this in here. You don't need to own one of these vehicles or drive or anything to have a love with these cars. It's like appreciating Mona Lisa, but you can't draw a straight line. So this quote I want to present. This is from a very famous uh, vehicle designer, Alec Isigonis from Britain. He is the famous designer behind the BMC Mini. I think anyone can recognize this vehicle. So he says, fashion dates, but logic is timeless. So I'm going to tell you about this timeless logic. So even before the the name car came into the scenario, people tried to uh, use this term in different methods. So some of them goes back to 600, like this emperor in China called Queen Shi. I'm not sure about how to pronounce it, but he used this sort of dragon sort of vehicle pulled by several men in his parades, in his New Year festivals. So this is another famous use. The Roman gladiators using these chariots to racing and war purposes. And this is a carriage in London, driven by two horse, and it was used to carry coal, I guess. So, and the fourth image is a painting of the Oregon Trail when the Great Migration happened from the East Coast to West Coast. They had to travel to Texas for gold mining. So they use cattle as their engine for their wagons. So why I am showing this, if you go a little beyond uh, with these images, you can identify that the same concept we use today, what the Chinese emperor used is what we use as luxury vehicles to show our status and power. What the gladiators used, we use as sports cars, all about speed and maneuverability. And uh, the London carriages, we use them as trucks. And the wagons in the Oregon Trail, we use them as state estate wagons and SUVs. And before the Industrial Revolution, people had this idea of having a self-propelled vehicle, but they didn't had the technology. But people were inventing, people were thinking beyond their limits. So there was a revolution. In 1478, a Dutch person called Robert Valturi had this great idea of using wind as the propulsion method. So it's basically a cart with four wheels, and there will be sails just like in a sailing ship. So we know that these Dutch people were very good at uh, building ships. So it's natural for him to have this idea. And Leonardo da Vinci, master of all, he also had his idea about a self-propelled car. So this is very similar to what you had in your childhood, a toy that you can crank backwards and the spring tightens and you release it and the vehicle moves forward. The same concept he used during his time. So this was also an exhibit vehicle. So this is how people thought before a reliable source of propulsion came into the scene. So during the Industrial Revolution, we know that a very innovative uh, propulsion method came. It's the steam engine. So the steam engine changed the entire world. So the human power was replaced by machines, and there were big factories, and everything was industrialized. And the transportation was changed with the steam engine. But there was a little problem. The steam engine was bulky and it was noisy and it was unreliable. And most importantly, it was big. So you can see the uses of it. It was used in the first steam boat, the turbine, and the steam locomotive. So they were large. You can't fit a steam engine into a small road car. So they had to wait. But in 1769, this French guy, Nicolas Joseph Cugnot, had this model vehicle which had three wheels. This is considered as the world's first self-propelled car. So I think you have learned in history in your school that the Benz patent motor wagon or the Carl Benz car is the world's first car. No, this is actually the world's first car, but it is not the modern car. That changes. I'll explain it later. So basically, this has a large boiler. You can see this large pot-like thing is a boiler, and then they have the pistons, two pistons, and it will spin the wheel. So this is very basic. It's like a small train, but this inspired other inventors, other manufacturers. So by 1803, the idea of the steam car was very much in practical use. You can see one of the famous users of the steam car was these London steam carriages. I think they use these as tourist attractions even in the present day. So it was basically a horse-driven carriage, but there were no horse, and it was replaced by the steam engine. You can see these large wheels. The reason was the steam engine was still very pretty much big, so you have to accommodate it beneath the carriage, and the wheels has to uh, wheels are big to accommodate this height, the ground clearance. And they could carry 4 to 6 people in these carriages. But there was a problem with the steam engine, as I mentioned earlier. Steam engines were very unreliable and they were dangerous. The reason is at this time, the steam engines use high pressured steam. That means you have high pressure steam uh, contaminated inside a very small boiler. That means it can explode without warnings. So this person, another French guy called Gustave Trouve, in 1881 had a brilliant idea. Why don't we use the reliable and much more efficient electric motor to drive the car? But there was a problem before 1881. There was no efficient power source for these vehicles, the battery. So the rechargeable battery was developed during this time period, and at 1881, both the electric motor and the rechargeable battery was in good shape. So this person invented the world's first electric powered car. So it's not your Prius or the Tesla Model S, the world's first electric car. This person in 1881 invented that vehicle. So the ripple effects went through Europe, and people, the inventors from Britain, Germany, and USA, they adopted the same system. So this is a very famous photo of Thomas Alva Edison being next to an electric vehicle. So he once stated that the electric power is the future of transportation, which is partially acceptable. And another reason why these electric vehicles came into the scenario, these aristocratic women had a love for these electric cars because they were small, just like in present day. These cars were small and very easy to maneuver, and they were not noisy, they were not dirty, there was steam and coal and dust in the steam engines. So they loved these mini electric cars. But unfortunately, the internal combustion engine came into the scene just before these things had a time to make a foot in the industry. And another problem was the lack of infrastructure. So to operate an electric vehicle, you need charging stations. So because the power will eventually get low, so you have to recharge it. But at this time, there was no charging stations, and the idea was given up. So that was the beginning and the end of the electric car. But in 1969, this is a honorable mention. So we again used the all electric powered vehicle in the Apollo missions as the lunar rover. So the reason was on the surface of the moon, there is no air. So an internal combustion engine could not work. So in 1885, another giant leap came into the industry as the Benz patent motor wagon. Carl Benz was a German He was from Germany, and he lived in a small uh, town called Mainham. I'm not sure about how to pronounce it. So anyway, the important part of his story is he was uh, he was very poor at the time, but he had his family, two sons and wife, who were helping to bring this invention into the world. So at a point, the citizens of this small town complain to the mayor that this person is disturbing their freedom. Because at that time, even though there were electric cars and steam cars in the cities, in this small town, this self-driven vehicle was unheard. So there were problems from the citizens. We are talking about 1885. So the mayor who saw this vehicle, he was smart enough to understand this is going to change the entire world. He gave a letter writing, Carl, you are permitted to go from here to here during these times in these streets. And eventually it became the world's first driver's license. So Carl Benz partnered up with a person called Daimler in the automotive industry. You might have heard this name. So together they created Daimler Benz. Later it became Mercedes Benz. So Mercedes Benz became one of the most recognizable brands in the automotive industry and a very luxury brand. So they have, in the present day, they have their uh, uh, footprint everywhere in the sky, in the sea, and on the land. So that's what their logo is for. Those 3 points are mimicking those land, air, and earth. So these are trivia stuff. Anyway, they now build everything from aeroplane engines, boat engines, and off-road vehicles, racing cars, and family vehicles. So they are pioneering these future concepts of the cars also. So just like this Mercedes company, there were small companies blooming during these early 1900s. So this very interesting chart, if you're a person who is into cars, you will definitely find this very interesting. These small names, I'm not sure if you can read it, but these small uh, words are the early names of now famous companies. So some of them you can, if you can read, you can recognize them: BMW, Austin, Leyland, Riley, MG, Opel. So there are a lot of them. So sometimes, funny enough, some of these companies had a different start. For an example, in here you can see Toyota Motor Company. If you trace back its origin, it is Toyota Spinning and Weaving Company. So it's basically a garment factory. And the Mitsubishi Motors was it's a shipbuilding company. And these thick lines in different colors represent the corporations. So this happens in the economy uh, when uh, when there are ups and downs in the economy. The small companies has to merge together to survive. So there are four major companies. Now they are changed, but at that time, General Motors, Ford Motors, and Chrysler and Daimler. These four major companies own all these small companies, and they were operated by this single management. And in 1908, another special innovation came out as the 40 model by Henry Ford. So there was a problem in the industry. Cars were very luxury items. The reason was the cars were handmade, and only 15 or 20 units were produced per each month because they had to made by hand. This guy had this idea: every person should be able to afford a car. So what he did was he introduced mass production methods into the factories. What is mass production? A single worker will only focus on doing one certain purpose. For an example, one builder will only fix the steering wheel to the car. So all the day he will do that same thing. So it will be very efficient. So Henry Ford was able to produce thousands of vehicles per month, and the price dropped. More units in the road, the price drops down. And there's another genius idea behind the 40 model. It's like a Lego. So what his idea was, you have a very unique uh, undercarriage. It contains the wheels and the chassis and the engine, and the top part you can exchange it. So in this way, you can have different models but the same undercarriage. So you don't need to change the factories and change the parts, and it's a whole complicated process. You don't need to do that. So from that way, he was able to build very, let's say, trucks from the same chassis undercarriage, which he used to make the luxury sedans. So I would like to present this quote from Henry Ford. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said fast horses. So this person thought ahead and brought the innovation to the society. So this is how these people think. And the First World War came. So during this time, the industry had a pause in terms of manufacturing process, but the technological advancements gained through this war effort was very beneficial. Let's say the aeroplane engine was, they had to develop it, and the steam, the ships, there were electrics and the tanks and armored cars. This gave a very big boost into the industry technologically. So when the war was over, there were plenty of luxury brands coming out with good models, reliable engines, and good safety methods. So some of these vehicles, I'm not going into detail all these models, but some of the very good examples are this Rolls-Royce Phantom 2 in 1927 from Britain. You can see how much brass they have used in these vehicles, the chrome and brass. So these cars were very expensive. And Bugatti from France, Bugatti Royal 1927. And if you are a fan of these cars, you can recognize this curve, which they used in 1927, is still there to the day in the Bugatti Chiron. They use the same design language. And Alfa Romeo from Italy. So nowadays they don't produce luxury vehicles but sports vehicles. But back in the day, they had these luxury vehicles. And Bentley from Britain, still they are a very good luxury brand. And the 8-liter model had an aeroplane engine in the front. That's why this front part is very big. And Peugeot from France, these companies don't make luxury vehicles today, but and in 1930, this is one of the famous pre-war models in the world. So it's the Mercedes-Benz 770K Grosser, the parade car used by Adolf Hitler from Nazi Germany. So this car, it's a very beautiful car, but it's an armored vehicle. So there are armored door panels and the engine was protected. There are bulletproof panels. The tires are bulletproof. So it's a very beautiful tank. So he used this vehicle in his parades and to impress his people, Germans, and he used to accommodate his friends like Benito Mussolini. So, but ironically enough, the car that was designed to protect Hitler didn't have a roof. In 1938, another iconic vehicle came up. It's the Volkswagen Beetle by Ferdinand Porsche. So this vehicle is one of the most identifiable vehicles in the world. Anyone knows about this car. So, but it came during the 1930s, 38. And the thoughts that went through this car was so timeless. The production went till 2002, from 1938 to 2002, the same model with minor changes. So you can see how timeless the concept for this car was. So this became the world's most produced car till the Toyota Corolla came up. The world's most produced model is the Toyota Corolla, but this was before that. And there is a whole culture behind this vehicle. If you have seen in these movies how these hipsters use these vehicles. There's a whole culture and fan base behind these vehicles. So with the success, they introduce another vehicle, this van-like vehicle. It's called the VW bus. So the history of this car is a little bit dark, even though it's considered as a emblem of peace. So Adolf Hitler wanted a car for the average German family as a part of his propaganda. So he invited the famous designer Ferdinand Porsche. So he introduced his model. This is famous photo. Actually, it's the moment he is presenting the model. So Hitler gave the go, and that's how the legend was born. And the Second World War, it was a complete pause for the automobile industry. And not like the First World War, it didn't give a lot of innovation to the industry, but it was a complete pause for the industry. So the vehicle manufacturing brands and the companies, they had to adapt to the situation. So what happened was some of the luxury brands had to produce war material. So this aeroplane from Germany, the BMW company had to make the engine for this plane. And the famous Mitsubishi Zero was designed and produced by the Mitsubishi company. And this is a mass production line in United States owned by Ford. Previously, they used it to make cars. Now they are making aeroplanes out of the factory. And Porsche, the luxury brand we know today, they made tanks. And Renault, they made tanks. And Rolls-Royce made the engine for the very famous Spitfire aeroplane. And this three posters I find interesting. So this is how these luxury and now very humble brands presented themselves during the war effort. So after the war, in 1948, the industry was still influenced by this war effort, the designs and everything. People were thinking in a very utilitarian manner. So that's how the very famous Land Rover came into the scenario. So the British Army wanted a vehicle that was similar to the Jeep. So I need to mention about the Jeep first. The US Army had their Jeep. This is a very multi-purpose vehicle. So the main concept behind this vehicle was to have a undercarriage which could be replaceable by uh, different body types, similar to the Ford T model. So the Britons had this idea during the 1948 after the war. We also need one of them. So that's how the first generation Land Rover came into the scenario. And the Land Rover was an ambulance, a boat, a gun platform. And this poster you can see, I got more than a pretty face. I got 38 body styles. So the logic was to have a very unique, a very uh, interchangeable upper part, so you can have you can suit it for different functions. So it can be a troop carrier and a truck, a heavy duty truck from the same undercarriage. And in Britain, after the war, Britain was in an economical crisis. They had spent a lot to the war effort, and they were poor. So the average British family needed a very compact small car. So that's how the legendary BMC Mini came into the scene. So uh, even though you're not a car fan, you might recognize this vehicle from the pop cultural influences, such as Mr. Bean's car is a BMC Mini, and the Italian Job movie, 1969, had this BMC Mini. So it gave a big boost to the brand, these movies. So the same the music I played before the presentation, I got it from this movie. So if you ask a British person what was the British icon during the 1960s, he will say that it was the BMC Mini. This little economically friendly car, this budget car, family car, was the icon in the empire for 10 years. So the reason is this car was adopted by very famous people. There are a lot of people, but I choose Paul McCartney had one of these BMC minis. And in the 1960s and 70s, in USA, it was different for the US market because not like Britain, they were very rich at the time. After the war, they had gained a lot of money. So they didn't need small compact vehicles, mini cars. They wanted big, large, noisy, gas guzzling vehicles. That's how the the US muscle cars came into the scene. So this era is called as the era of V8 and Chrome. V8 is sort of an engine, a tuned engine. It's basically the internal combustion engine, but in a different format. It gives more power in a small package. So chrome is this material, this shiny material. You can see it's expensive to have it on a car because it's heavy. If you apply more chrome, your car gets heavy and the fuel economy goes down. So some of the examples are these Cadillac Eldorado, which had this controversial shape, tail fins. This is how if you look at these cars very carefully, you can see how these people thought, how their imagination was, because these cars are like time machines. And the very famous Ford Mustang, Chevrolet Corvette, and the Ford GT. In the European context, the car brands who survived the war now had their factories running. So not in large quantities, not like in the US market, but they also had their cars coming out from the factories. So some companies were born during this time, like the Lamborghini company. It's very new compared to the other brands. But this car, the Aston Martin DB5, these are some of the most recognizable cars during this era, but there are plenty of them. And the Jaguar E-Type, the Porsche 911 model, this is a Ferrari, I can't remember the model, and the Lotus. So these cars, they had their presence in the industry, but not like in the US market. So there comes another wave in the 80s, the 70s, 80s, another wave come, not as a war, but as the economical crisis and the global warming. So as I mentioned earlier, the 1960s and 70s cars were designed to for this very luxurious market, they were not economically viable during the 80s and 70s. The reason was they were gas guzzling cars. They used too much of fuel when you compare to the compact cars used in Britain. So the average US customer had to rethink. At this time, there were wars going on in the Middle East countries and in the Falklands War during these 80s, and people were conscious about the climatic impact they are doing with these petroleum oils, and people were people were a little bit radical at this time. So there was a problem to the US market to have their vehicles uh, being unsold because the average family can't afford to have these uh, gas guzzling vehicles. So another nation had a good idea. Now it's the time for us to come out. Japan, another country who was beaten up by the war, now had slowly their economy was rising, and they had these small, affordable, and reliable cars with them. So what they did was they introduced these vehicles into the US and European markets, and quickly uh, the US citizens loved these cars because they were very affordable, very cheap, and they were not gas guzzling vehicles. They were very economical, and they had low maintenance. So uh, that's why we have these Japanese vehicles even today. This is how it started. So some of the famous models during these times were the Toyota Corolla. We still have the modern version of this Toyota Corolla, and Toyota Corona, and Honda Accord. So I'm not sure about the Corona, but other two brands, they still exist. And after the US citizens were very much into these Japanese vehicles, now the designers thought it's the time to introduce our own versions of the sports vehicles. So that's how these famous Datsun 240Z and the Nissan Skyline GT came into the scene. So there is a huge fan base behind these vehicles. And even in Sri Lanka, during these times, we had a lot of imports to our country. That's how these Japanese vehicles came into our country. We still rely on Japanese cars because they are very good to our roads and our economy. And for third world countries, these Japanese vehicles are very suitable, not like the gas guzzling American versions. And the Japanese took into the next step. They were good at robotics, and they merged these two technologies, the mass production and robotics, into the same package, and they were able to multiply the production rates. And that's how thousands and thousands of vehicles were produced during a single day, and the unit price went down. And the third world countries love these Japanese vehicles. So this is a honorable mention for the Japanese car lovers. So there is another huge fan base in Sri Lanka behind these cars. So in the 80s and 90s, there was another shift, a design change. The basic concepts were changed during the 80s and 90s. Now people wanted to cruise. What is cruising is you have a vehicle and you have to have a large space and a large trunk, and you will go thousands and thousands of miles from a city to another city. This happened in the 80s and 90s in the United States. So they had a good highway system, and it was cheaper to go on a vehicle than having a airplane ticket. So, and people love this experience. So you can see the cars are just not technologically, the evolution is not only based on technology. Sometimes it's a social factor, sometimes it's a wars. That's the difference in this machine. So uh, the first modern SUV was the Jeep Cherokee. So the concept behind this vehicle was you have a lot of space inside the vehicle. So because you're cruising means you have to spend a lot of time inside the vehicle. So you have a good spacious interior, and you had a big trunk. So you can put your camping instruments and everything. And you had a very reliable engine. Most of these cars were diesel engines because the diesel engines were cheaper and they can give more power than the petrol engines. And some of the famous models during these days were the Ford Bronco, Jeep Wrangler, and different models from the Land Rover. And some of these had the off-roading capabilities. So in the name, SUV means sports utility vehicle. So the name has the sports part. So the off-roading capabilities were there. The reason was sometimes you had to go off-road. Sometimes you have to go through a very rough terrain. So the off-roading capabilities was there, but the very concept behind these vehicles were the cruising. And the siblings of this breed, minivans and MPVs, multi-purpose vehicles, they were born. And there is a problem that in Sri Lanka we use these SUVs a lot. But the question is, do we have cruising highways, like the maximum uh, length we can use these cars is 400 or 500 kilometers. So there is a problem. We are these, and there's another thing. These SUVs are not good for the nature. They are producing more emission because they have big engines, and so it's good if 4 or 6 people are using this for cruising. But just imagine in a country like ours, only one person use this SUV to go to the supermarket. That's not the idea behind these vehicles. So but the trend came during the 80s and 90s, but the trend uh, was there till the uh, 2010. And all the famous luxury brands, and they had to adapt to this situation. So that's how these luxury SUVs came into scenario. These companies were very stubborn till recent, but they had to admit they have to build their own SUV model. That's how these the first green color vehicle, the Bentley Bentayga, and the yellow color one, Lamborghini Urus, and left uh, red color car, the Aston Martin DBX, and the Rolls Royce Cullinan. So if you have seen at least once a Rolls Royce vehicle, you can see how the design is there. This face of the Rolls Royce Ghost or the Phantom is still there. You can identify this Lamborghini from its very sharp edges, and you can identify the Bentleys from their very organic shapes. In the 90s, it was the era of alternative fuel. So people were now a little bit concerned about the environmental impact they have done. So they thought that we need to change the system. And economically, people were conscious about their money because the fuel prices were rising from the 80s. So that's how the hybrid car came into the scene. So what's a hybrid car? It's basically, it has two propulsion methods. Say, you have the conventional combustion engine, and you have an electric motor and a battery. So the power from the combustion engine, it will generate electricity and it will charge the battery. So you can later use the electric motor. So one of the famous models, the Toyota Prius, is considered as the most produced, most sold hybrid vehicle in the world. So they didn't stop from there. They tried different sources of energy. They tried with solar power. They tried with hydrogen fuel cell. This Ford car was powered with hydrogen cells, but it was not a good propulsion system because there were problems with the safety. And this is a little Easter egg. During you might be thinking that this technology is very new and modern. Your car in your garage, the Prius, is very modern. No, even during the 1940s, they had electric and combustion, the diesel engine powered, the hybrid tanks during the 1940s. So all the Japanese brands quickly understood that this is the next step they have to make to dominate the industry. So all the brands switch into these hybrid vehicles. So that's how we have a lot of hybrid Japanese cars in our roads. So the European vehicles, the European brands, they were a little bit stubborn because they believe that the combustion engine was they need to enhance it to a certain level. And uh, unlike the Japanese manufacturers, they were only concerning about the speed, acceleration, and these stuff. But the Japanese designers, what they wanted was a compact family car, very economical and very safe. So the two different concepts had to come into the same ground at a point because the market, what people wanted was changing, and they had to respond to it. And what's happening in the present day? So this is the next wave coming. It's already there. The AI, electric, and China. So artificial intelligence is what the defining factor of the future design. So the designers are thinking about autonomous vehicles where you don't have a driver. The car thinks by itself, and it communicates with other cars and gather data, and it analyze it and decide the best route and best lane for you. You don't have to do anything. So the other factor is all electric powered cars. So the internal combustion engine is outdated when it comes to the electric engine. So the electric motors are more efficient and more environmentally friendly. And the third wave is China. So you might not have heard about this wave. In China, there is a huge market building up for these vehicles. So this is just one example. This Land Wing model, this green color vehicle, is an exact copycat of the Land Rover vehicle. So Chinese people are very good at copying stuff and making their own stuff. So you can buy this vehicle for the half price of an original Land Rover vehicle. So they have hundreds and thousands of brands. You can't even pronounce their name. So they are invading the market. So the US and European markets, the designers, they don't even care about these Chinese market, I mean Chinese brands, but they are making huge difference. You be even in Sri Lanka, you can see these Chinese brands coming in different names like MG. It was a very prestigious brand back in the day, Morris Garage, but now it's a Chinese owned company. So they are coming in different phases. And in the modern era, the most innovative company, I think you might have heard about them, Tesla Motors. So Elon Musk, the innovative mind behind this whole idea, he wanted to bring the all electric vehicle into the roads. So he learned from the past, he learned from the history. I mentioned it in an earlier slide in 1881 how the electric car came and it disappeared. So he knew before bringing the electric car into the roads, he need to think about the infrastructure. So he built the Tesla charging stations all around the US highways, and then brought the Tesla car. So the Tesla car is an all electric model. There is no internal combustion engines. You charge it and you drive it. So this is the Tesla Cybertruck. This is how they interpret the future of the double cab or the truck. So uh, this is the secret behind the success of the Tesla company. So this is basically the undercarriage of the Tesla car. So they have a huge slab of a battery. So we don't know actually what's inside this battery, but they assume there are thousands of double A size batteries, rechargeable batteries inside this large slab. And this yellow part is the motor. So you can understand how small is the electric motor is. It was in 1881 also, they had this idea how the electric motor was very small and efficient. Why don't we use it? But unluckily they were not able to achieve it because there was no infrastructure. But you can see the electric engine is very small. So just think about the space you can get on top of this undercarriage. That's why the Tesla Model S is a very, very spacious car. And it has two trunks because there is no engine. And I would like to show you some honorable mentions. Sometimes you might be a car fan, you might be a person who owns a car, but sometimes cars touch us in a different way. So some of these cars have uh, been in our minds for a long time. This might be the way. This might be the start for some car lovers. So the very famous Knight Rider. It was a Pontiac Trans Am, the original car. They modified it into this self-driving talking car, and the DMC DeLorean, Back to the Future movie. This car was a very unsuccessful car in the industry, and they only sold few models. But in Hollywood, it was a big hit. And the Dodge Viper, this car was the TV series was all about promoting this vehicle because at that time the Dodge Viper came out into the scene. And the famous car driven by 007 James Bond series Aston Martin DB5. And this vehicle, the Batmobile, it's not a production car, but it's another famous car you most of you will know. And I am sure you have seen this movie uh, before, the Jurassic Park movie. They use the Jeep Wrangler and the Jeep Cherokee as the cars in the movie, and the Cadillac from the Ghostbusters movie, and the VW Beetle from the Herbie movie, and the Audi R8 from the Iron Man, and the Chevrolet Camaro from Transformers. And some of the another set of cars that you might recognize, the Mercedes that brought death to Princess Diana, the presidential limousine, the Cadillac Beast, and the parade vehicle of the Pope, and the Hummer H1 of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the Bentley of Elton John, and this Audi concept model from the movie called iRobot. So there's a little thing about this Audi model. This at the time of the screening of this movie, this Audi model was a concept car built by Audi. This was not a production vehicle, but a few years later, it became a reality. as the Audi R8. You can see the design elements that they have took into the later production version. So I would like to conclude my presentation. I hope you uh, got some knowledge about how this car came into our lives, starting from humble beginning. So to end my presentation, I would like to play a little video.
A witch! A witch is coming! A witch!
Stay with your brother.
Hello!
Is the pharmacist in here? I'm looking for 10 liters of Ligroin.
You won't get those stains out of that dress. Better buy a new one.
It's not for my dress. It's for my carriage.
Are you trying to poison your horses?
Do you have 10 liters or not?
Thank you very much, Ryan, for that very interesting presentation. Then I guess we can conclude for today. So once again, thank you for the presentation, Ryan, and thank you for the input from the audience. And especially thank you to Indica De Silva for offering to like aid this with introduction of introducing some of the designing people. to yeah. And so I guess we'll conclude. Have a good week and stay safe, and good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.